At this time, I would like to turn today's program over to Rob Tate. Mr. Tate, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Courtney, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Solution for Ensuring Compliance with Mobile Consent Requirements. Again, my name is Rob Tate. I'm excited to be speaking with you today. Just one more housekeeping item before we get started. Quickly, today's content will be made available in the coming weeks and then follow up to today's call and webinar and be made available on our website at possiblenowandcompliancepoint.com. Again, I'm excited to be speaking with you. I'm also excited to have a couple other speakers with me today. First, Jane Bullman. Jane's a 37-year cable TV and communications professional with experience in marketing, sales, and general management. She's been with Comcast for 26 years and currently serves as the Vice President of Telesales, where she leads not only telesales strategies for the company, but also ensures Comcast regulatory compliance. Jane's also a member of the PACE National Board of Directors and also a trustee within their self-regulatory organization. And prior to joining Comcast, she spent time with Showtime Networks and also earlier in her career worked as a radio talk show host, so you'll recognize her radio voice a little bit later in the webinar today. Today, Jane lives in southern New Jersey with her husband, Regis. She's an obsessive tennis player and a loyal New York Mets fan. She's also been instrumental in the transformation for Comcast from a very specific channel focus to really leading the charge around customer experience for them. Also joining us is Matt Cagle. Matt is a senior director with Compliance Point. He's a direct marketing compliance expert and has consulted with dozens of companies as they try to comply with the rules. He also asked me to mention that he has 2 daughters under the age of 2, so he might actually be asleep as I'm saying this. So thanks for joining us, Matt. Again, my name is Rob Tate. I'm with Possible Now. I'm our Director of Enterprise Sales. Full disclosure, I am the sales guy. I'm going to be talking about our solution for wireless and mobile compliance today. I love what I do. I love being out in the field with our customers, specifically focusing on the challenges they face around privacy and preference management and getting solutions in place to help them comply. So quickly, what we're going to be covering today, first, why mobile is a key component in the marketing mix. I know I'm speaking to the choir a little bit, preaching to the choir as it relates to that. Obviously, that's why many of you are here today. So it's going to be a recurring theme throughout the call. Because it has become such a predominant channel, such an increasing part of marketing budget, actually up 60% in 2014 from last year, but because we just expect scrutiny to increase in this area. That's why Matt's going to be talking about the risks surrounding TCPA compliance. I'm going to talk a little bit about our solution for express consent management, and then we're going to hear from Jane, again, on best practices from her Comcast case study. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Before we jump into the solutions for complying with the new requirements under the TCPA, and before Jane explains how Comcast is tackling the challenge, I just want to give a brief overview of what the TCPA amendments from October require, just so everyone's aware of the challenges that we're talking about. A few years ago, the MMA, the Mobile Marketing Association, got everything started with their double opt-in requirement. And now the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, is following suit, and it's been about 6 months now since the amendments that they made to the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, the TCPA, went into effect. Hopefully everyone joining us today is aware of what those changes require, but again, if not, I'll give you a quick brief overview. After October 16, 2013, if you want to place a solicitous or a telemarketing call to a consumer cell phone, you have to have their prior express written consent if that call is going to be placed using an automated telephone dialing system. This applies to any solicitous call to a cell phone, whether it is to a consumer cell phone or a cell phone that's held out for business purposes. The prior standard of consent for non-solicitous calls still applies if you're using an automated telephone dialing system. So we're only talking about sales calls, solicitous calls to cell phones made using an automated telephone dialing system, and you can see the definition of an ATDS here. I do also want to mention that this would apply to any text messages that would be sent for marketing or solicitation purposes to a cell phone. Those are typically sent using some sort of blast method, and typically when that occurs, an ATDS is involved. The FCC can enforce the changes that went into effect on the 16th. The FTC can also enforce portions of the TCPA, and so can state attorneys general. But the biggest risk, we believe, for companies is the private right of action that consumers have if they believe they receive a call on their cell phone that they should not have. And we'll show a few figures later that show that the level of awareness among consumers is extremely high when it comes to the TCPA requirements, and the amount of enforcement is beginning to increase as a result. If you believe that you want to place calls or send text messages to a cell phone and you're going to do so using an ATDS, or you are currently doing that, you need to get that written consent. And just as a reminder, this consent has some pretty strict requirements that it must adhere to. Basically, it needs to be extremely clear to the consumer what they're agreeing to. They have to agree in writing. This can be done electronically through e-sign, or also orally if it adheres to the e-sign requirements by recording the call. But the consumer needs to, when giving the consent, indicate the seller that they're giving consent to, indicate the number they're agreeing to receive calls on. They also need to take some sort of affirmation of agreement, so an affirmative yes or a positive response, or by checking a box on a web form confirming that they understand what they're agreeing to. And then that statement needs to clearly spell out that they're authorizing the seller to make solicitous calls, marketing calls to their cell phone, that those calls may be placed using an ATDS or pre-recorded message if that's your plan. And you also cannot mandate that consent be required as a condition to purchase goods or receive services from your company, so you cannot try to force it. So as you can see, this is a pretty stiff requirement, but it just goes along with this movement that we've seen for years now, from an opt-out universe to an opt-in universe. If you're not getting this consent now, whether it's because you've adjusted your dialer so it's not considered an ATDS, or you just don't think you need it, we disagree. Ultimately, for you to market efficiently and reach customers and prospective customers like you want to, you're going to want to start evaluating ways to collect those opt-ins. You can see here, cell phones are extremely popular, especially among younger age groups. Nearly 100% of people between the ages of 18 and 49 now have a cell phone. Starts to taper off as you get a little bit up there in age, but again, nearly everyone you're going to want to market to, you can reach mobilely. And as you'd expect, the higher the household income, the more likely a consumer is to have a cell phone. It's basically anyone with a household income over $50,000 now has a cell phone, and when it's less than $50,000, you're still talking at least 90% for most people, 84% for that lower income range. But again, the point here is if you've put off collecting the consent for one reason or another, I strongly consider you start considering ways to gain it, because you're going to want to have the ability to reach out to people, whether it's calls or text messages to cell phone, at some point in the future. One quick reminder, a lot of companies seem to believe that they can rely on the consumer when they provide their phone number to indicate whether it's wireless. That's not the case. The burden is on the seller to know before calling whether or not the wireless requirements apply, and this is the new federal requirements under the TCPA, but also those state-specific rules that hopefully you're aware of. I have a few examples here of how risky it can be to rely on the consumer to self-identify that wireless number. So we have an insurance client that we worked with, and they had 12% of their customer base that put their wireless number, or put their phone number in the wireless field. But when we looked at all the phone numbers that were ultimately provided to that insurance company, it was actually almost half the numbers they received that were wireless. And then a bit of a more dramatic example, and this is very recent data from a college client that we work with, only 7% of their prospective students and current students put their phone number in the wireless field. But when we ran the data, because of those younger age group stats we just showed you, 85% of the numbers that they had were wireless. That is a significant amount, and it is only going to increase. And so if you're operating thinking you're not going to have to worry about this or worry about collecting consent, we still disagree, and you want to, again, consider those methods to start getting those opt-ins. And before I turn it over to Rob, I just want to give a brief mention on the level of enforcement. The amendments, again, are only about 6 months old at this point. We have not seen any federal enforcements yet, and probably won't for a while, but class actions are becoming rampant. They are starting to come nearly on a daily basis. We operate an expert witness service, and we are being hit up by law firms weekly to help them defend potential violations of the TCPA, and it's because the fees are not capped, and the lawyers just rake it in when it comes to these class actions. There was recently a settlement that's not related to the TCPA, but it did relate to text messages to consumers, and involved a professional football team, and they sent too many text messages than what the consumer expected when they provided their consent, and ultimately the consumers in the class got up to $75 in gift cards to the team store, but the lawyers in the case got over $500,000 in legal fees as part of the settlement agreement. So the stakes we're talking about are extremely high, and that's, I believe, why we're seeing all these cases start to roll in. And we're also aware of a lot of the law firms that we partner with. They are starting to ramp up their staff to help their clients defend allegations of TCPA violations. A few stats here just to show the increase in litigation. It was up nearly 70% in 2013 over 2012. And then just in March of 2014, it was up nearly 60% versus the same time in 2013. Ultimately, we just want to make sure that you're prepared to respond to complaints and that you're collecting preferences whenever possible and honoring those preferences. Record keeping is extremely important. You want to maintain copies of your consent forms, your call recordings where you obtain consent, and then your dial records to show when you may have dialed these numbers. We recommend you keep all of those for at least 5 years. And at the same time, do everything you can to avoid complaints. Ask consumers how they want to be marketed to by your company, and when they tell you, accept that preference and honor that preference, not only because you have to at the federal and state level, but because the numbers show that ultimately it's going to be a better experience for the customer in the long run. So that concludes the compliance wrap-up. I'm going to turn it over to Rob, and he'll give you some options on how you can solve compliance with the TCPA amendments.
Thanks, Matt. That's right. What I'm going to talk about are some specific points, some specific objectives that we should cover with a strategy, with a solution for mobile TCPA compliance. I'm going to show you a look at what it actually looks like, the solution, but then show how it also lays a groundwork and a path forward toward a better experience for your customers overall. So at a very basic level, there are 3 key things that this application should be able to do. We'll show you how ours meet these requirements. But first, the ability to identify mobile phones. Is this phone number, this SMS number, in fact wireless? Can we validate that? 2, the ability to display consent and disclosure language when appropriate and to capture that consent, that opt-in when it's provided by customers and prospects. And lastly, record keeping and reporting on all that activity to ensure that we have a defendable due diligence position. So I'm going to walk through each of these in a little detail. The first on mobile phone identification, as Matt called out earlier, self-designation absolutely is not enough. People are not 100% accurate as they're delineating what's a wireless number and what's not, so we can't rely on them to say, is it wireless, is it mobile, is it a cell phone or landline, etc. We have to take a step farther than that. This becomes somewhat difficult for some organizations because there's not a standardized database available like the Directory Assistance Platform, that 411 database that's available for landline phones. There is some carrier data that's out there, but it's not a holistic view of all the wireless numbers and their current status. So organizations have to take it a step farther and check against a couple lists to identify whether or not a phone number truly is wireless. Specifically, a wireless block identifier, taking a look at those first 7-digit, that NPA and XX exchange, but the portability list currently managed by Neustar as well to see what numbers have been ported over time. That process for checking for wireless status should likely happen in a couple ways. You've likely accumulated a large database of consumer, customer, and prospect contact records, including those phone numbers, and it could be millions and millions of rows of data potentially where there are high volume processing requirements that you might have for database scrubbing to identify what's wireless and what's not. But moving forward, as you're collecting these phone numbers on a one-off basis directly from your customers, there are real-time requirements as well. So we can be able to identify immediately, instantly, whether or not a phone number is in fact wireless, validate that that's the case, and then take the appropriate action, which of course would be then displaying the appropriate disclosures and capturing that consent from our customers. And the important thing to call out there is we really don't want to take a one-size-fits-all approach to the way that we manage that consent, display, and capture process. We only want to serve up that disclosure, that consent language when we have validated that a phone number is wireless. The reason we do that, again, is so that we're not serving it up to people that are providing landlines if we don't have to, so that this doesn't impact our click-through or adoption rates or introduce additional questions for our customers. So it is important that that language that we're presenting is in line and consistent with not only the regulatory requirements around TCPA express consent, but also in line with your business rules as well. Most of our enterprise organizations have different products and lines of business where the words that they use and this consent language that is provided varies slightly. You need an application that can adapt to that seamlessly so that ultimately this consent can be displayed and captured across all your consumer touch points. And we're going to show a couple specific examples today of how you can do that. What we really highly recommend is kind of an audit or inventory of your current customer experience, all the ways that you're engaging them today, all those touch points that currently exist, so that we can identify where there is an opportunity when we're collecting those wireless numbers to capture that consent. That could be when someone's investigating our brand for the first time, they're inquiring, they're filling out a web form or even a physical form at point of sale, or with customer onboarding as we're completing their profile within my account, but in human-to-human interactions as well. If those are in field operations or call center sales or service operations, all these are opportunities for us to identify whether phone numbers are wireless, and if in fact they are, collect consent so we can keep this very valuable channel, communication channel open. Lastly, Matt talked about this a little bit, but record keeping and reporting is arguably one of the most valuable, most important points of a solution like this, because it's just key to building that defendable due diligence position. Fortunately, unfortunately, the burden of proof is on us as marketers, as we're communicating with consumers, to make sure that we do have the right defendable due diligence position in place. And this is an area where we see a lot of other folks fall down in the marketplace, and specifically where they're trying to build a solution on their own. Being able to transactionalize everything that's happening around wireless list management, phone number identification, record keeping and reporting for administrator and data management activities can get to be tough, and there's a lot that goes into that. Where did this person come from? What was their source when they came to opt in? What time, down to the second, did this take place so that we can sync the data appropriately across databases and many other touch points? What language was presented? What administrators internally created those programs and campaigns and opt-in disclosure sets that are being presented to the customers, and then managing that whole data process as well, and alerting to any activities that we might need to know about, again, whether those are opt-in or opt-out thresholds that we're hitting as customers are interfacing with us, but across our vendor network as well. So if we have fulfillment, call center operations, we know what's happening from an opt-in, opt-out, and data management perspective. So a quick look at kind of what this means in real life. The example that we're using here is our preference center, managed and backed by MyPreferences. And the example we're showing is where we're collecting a phone number from a customer. Obviously, this is an open field. They're typing in their phone number because they want to be called there. And when they do, real-time web services transactions happen on the back end that let us know this phone number is wireless. we need to confirm that with the customer and serve up the appropriate consent language and the ability for them to provide that affirmative agreement, that proactive step that says, yes, I do acknowledge this number is wireless. Yes, I do acknowledge that I'm providing my consent for you to contact me at this number, and of course meeting all the other regulatory requirements around that consent language as well. Lastly, again, the record keeping and reporting has to be there. We're transactionalizing and memorializing every step in that process to be able to show for that phone number when that person opted in and opted out over time, specifically what they opted in or opted out of, the dates that happened, so we're syncing it appropriately, but then receipts that show everything else around it as well, the administrator activities and who's actually managing that entire process. So that kind of walks through that user experience, but I want to give a little more detail on what's actually happening on the back end with this process flow, the decision tree that drives how we're managing this compliance process. When that phone number is collected, again, whether it's through a web form, a call center application, a tablet, a point of sale, a kiosk, whatever the case may be, in real time we're leveraging web services to check against those relevant databases as designated by our customers to say, is this phone number wireless or not? If in fact the phone number is not wireless, we capture that data to demonstrate that they did inquire, they did provide the number, we do have an established business relationship exemption, and then store that data for historical reporting and record-keeping purposes. However, if we do that same check and the number is in fact wireless and validated by those lists that we're maintaining, we take a different set of steps. So in the event that it is wireless, we're then going to retrieve and serve up that e-signature form, that disclosure language that's required to be provided to the customer so they can take that proactive affirmative action where they have the ability to approve, disapprove, check a box, yes or no, so that ultimately we can capture that opt-in or opt-out and follow that same criteria for memorializing that information and maintaining it for historical and record-keeping purposes. And while the example we've used there is in that web customer experience, whether it's in a preference center or a collection form, really it's important to call out that that's really just the tip of the iceberg, again, when we consider your entire customer experience today. There are many ways that you're engaging your customers on your website the first time they encounter your brand, through a data portal or a physical form when they inquire for the first time, through other applications and devices, mobile, social, point of sale. But those human-to-human interactions are very important as well. So it's important that we are empowering our sales and service and field representatives as they're engaging with their customers and prospects, empowering them to be able to identify whether or not these wireless numbers are in the population and collecting that consent from their customers. And Jane's going to talk a little bit more about how Comcast is doing that. I would also point to this IVR example. One use case that we're talking with our customers about today is when their clients or prospects are calling into a call center environment, they identify that they've got some hold time that they might be able to monetize. They're performing a web services call to us where they identify whether or not that phone number is wireless. If it is, they're then reading a message to that customer that says, hi, Matt, it looks like the phone number you're calling from is wireless. We would like to contact you at this number. They then read off the appropriate consent language and say press 1 or 2 or pound to provide this consent. It meets those e-sign requirements. It comes back to us. It's transactionalized, and that record is returned to the marketable universe. So some really progressive things that we're doing. We'd love to talk to you all more about. But one thing I want to point to is how important this profile, this preference and permission data is to our customers to us as marketers, really, as we're completing this customer profile. You know, what we've seen over time is that marketers and servicing organizations have gotten much more sophisticated in the insights that they're gleaning about their customers so that ultimately they can deliver a better experience. And as we start at the bottom of this continuum, it's basic contact information. Who are you? How do I reach you? On top of that, we've got transactional information. What are you buying? What are you looking at online? Generally, we're overlaying that with analytics information from emerging channels. And as we see marketers building out this profile, generally there's less and less of this data as we're moving up this continuum. The processes are increasingly sophisticated that people are using to gain these insights and to complete this customer profile. generally it's more and more expensive, frankly, until we get to the top and we talk about those permissions, those preferences that we have to do the right thing by our customers in lines with compliance and for their customer experience. The only way we can gain this permission and preference data is to ask. And in that regard, it is absolutely priceless. We can't buy it. We have to earn it through trust within our customer and prospect base. But once we do, there's absolutely a trickle-down effect where this empowers all the other parts of our business and all the other segments where this data is managed. So with that, Jane, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Rob, and thanks for the opportunity to join this. And I am going to talk a little bit about where we are today at Comcast with regard to wireless and my job, which is selling the products and services that Comcast offers. Because people still say yes and purchase from their cell phones. Whether or not you think that if you were involved in telesales over the last 10 years since, really a little bit more than that, since the do not call list came into being, the fact is I'm still working because people still buy over the phone. And now we have to add to that they will do it via text. So I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But I want to talk about how we got ready for October 16th at Comcast. So before October 16th, 2013, we considered that we got express consent from a customer to call their wireless number if the customer provided that number to us as a contact number. And as Rob and Matt both talked about, we access the ported list, the New Star list, the cell phone list, all of that, so to make sure that we knew if a telephone number was wireless or landline. But in terms of the customer's point of view, if they provided us a number and it happened to be wireless, we considered that express consent, and it was enough to dial it via automated technology. If someone requested do not call for their wireless number, we honored that request. Back then, we really weren't doing anything with text marketing, SMS marketing at all, even though we knew that that was something we needed to get into. We never called non-subscribing homes with a cell phone number because, frankly, we didn't have it because, by definition, a non-customer hasn't any kind of an account with us. So we didn't call non-subscribing homes. We only got those that we had expressed consent as part of their account with us. And from a sales performance point of view, we started quite a long time ago tracking wireless versus landline campaigns to see what kind of an effect before and after the law would have. And we'd look at the kind of leads we'd get, the comparison, how we would contact them, the contacts per hour, and, of course, sales close rates, conversion rates. After the 16th, well, and I also want to add that one of the things we did with one of our vendor partners, our third-party outsourcer who did outbound for us, we also asked them, once they made a sale for us, when they were going through confirmation and verification, we asked the vendor to have their agents ask for permission if we could identify that we had made a sale to someone we had called on a cell phone. And 70% of the time, and this was recorded consent, which still fell under the e-sign requirements, 70% of the time, people who had just bought from us on their cell phone said, yes, I'm giving you permission, you can call me again. We'd like that 100%, but I think it was such an odd kind of question for us to ask from the consumer's point of view that, and I still think 70% was good. We don't do that anymore because we've had to take another tact after 10/16. But it did say to us something that I think we all knew, and that is people will still buy on their cell phone because so many people have them. So let me turn to after October 16th. If a customer provides us a wireless number, we still consider this express consent, but we don't call, because we haven't gotten written consent, we are dialing either internally with our internal outbound centers or working with our vendors. We dial via non-ATDS technology. We call that our alternate dialing solution. And we worked with all of our internal plus our external partners to make sure that their technology that they were using couldn't be defined as automated telephone dialing system. So that's basically our strategy right now, is that we are calling sort of manually, but it's not on ATDS technology. However, at the same time, we have established an opt-in process for customers who are managing their accounts online through something we call My Account. And that is if you want to pay your bill online or you want to order services through your account, we also have, and I'll show you that in a moment, an opt-in process. I stopped short of calling that a preference center because that's in development. That's going to take longer, but it is at least getting us to the point where we are asking people to opt in, and they are doing so. We still honor do not call requests. We have begun to market via SMS, tiptoeing into that a little bit. We still don't call our homes that don't subscribe, that are currently not subscribing, because we don't have their cell phones. And, of course, we still track the campaigns, and I'll share a little bit about that with you as well. But I really wanted to also talk about the fact that depending on in our world of telecommunications, cable TV, internet, when we are doing outbound telesales campaigns, we are targeting a certain profile of customer by level of service. And depending on that target, we would see a higher incidence of cell phones as a higher percentage of the targeted list, which kind of follows through with the other data that you just saw about who has a higher propensity. Younger as well as higher income have a higher propensity to have cell phones. Overall, wireless is slightly more than 50% of all of our target lists. But when I look at, and I draw your attention to the second bar, which is HSD only, which stands for high-speed data only. When we target somebody that only has our internet service to try to sell them video service or phone or our Xfinity Home security system, that's the list that is much higher wireless. So as we are looking at all of the lists, we are also cognizant of the demographics and can tailor our messages appropriately. So I'm going to kind of concentrate when I show you our results on that list, a high wireless percentage list. So here are our results. On the left, you'll see, and I know I don't have any numbers showing you the actual percentages, but it's really more for relationship. Pre-October 16, 2013, you'll see that the contact percentage was higher on cell phone. Not surprisingly, because people have it with them, the cell phone, and it's a little lower on landline. And in the blue, the take rate was also higher on cell phone. Post-10/16, post-October 16th, the relationship still remains. We are still getting a much higher contact rate on cell phones. And again, these are calling via non-automated telephone dialing systems, so manual dialing. We're still getting a higher contact rate, and we're still getting a higher take rate. And I think that that's good. The problem is that we're not contacting them as fast. So let me show you a little bit more in terms of key performance indicators and our results. So in 2013, this is just on wireless calling. In 2013, our cost per sale was just a little over $60 on this kind of campaign. It's much higher in 2014 to date, but it's lower than it was at the beginning of the year because we are getting better at managing this. Contacts per hour also are down, as you can imagine, between 2013 and 2014. And let me say that the 2013 numbers are all before October 16th, and the 2014 numbers are just this year. So the conclusions that we reach as we work with our vendor partners, our internal centers, is that you really have to manage. I'm not going to get into the employee considerations on all of this, but the fact of the matter is that with this kind of dialing, you have to manage agent by agent to make sure that we're maximizing time. So we're working towards increasing our contacts per hour, which hopefully will bring the cost per sale down. But absolutely, it is still worth calling cell phones. Okay, so even though we're doing this and we're calling cell phones, people are still buying, we still believe at Comcast that we have to go the preference center route. And that is what we are doing, and you'll see on the screen right now. This is a screen of our My Account, and it's a section of My Account called Users and Preferences. And that arrow, it's maybe a little hard to see, but if we go to the next slide, you might be able to see a little bit closer, that under your contact phone number, there is a little link called Manage Mobile Promotional Preferences. That sounds pretty clunky, and like I said, we're tiptoeing into the Preference Center work, and we're working very closely with Possible Now to do that. So if the telephone number that's the primary contact number in My Account is a cell phone number, when you click on Manage Mobile Promotional Preferences, here's what you'll see. You will see this screen, and it says, yes, I would like to hear about special offers and promotions related to Comcast and Xfinity via phone calls and or text messaging. And the phone number automatically populates, and then they must check the box. And you'll see that the language here looks very similar to what you saw on a previous screen that Rob shared with you. I give my consent to Comcast or its authorized agent to call me using automated technology at the wireless phone number above. This consent is for promotional or sales messages. I understand I'm not required to provide consent to make a purchase. So the first box is for calling a wireless number. The second box is for texting. And, someone's going to have to read through that. But interestingly, we get about 50% more yeses to the SMS than we do on the cell phone, because I think people are more used to that, and certainly the younger you are, the more you do on the texting side. So once that's submitted, again, this is actually a screen that goes to Possible Now, where we keep all of our lists, our do not call list, as well as our opt-in lists, and all the tracking that you saw on a previous screen. That's what's happening. So we are doing this. We are not making a big deal about this. It is amazing to me, frankly, that so many people are finding this, even though we don't do a lot of promoting, and all you see is that clunky manage your mobile promotional marketing preferences. So, but what happens if that telephone number, that contact number, is actually a landline number? This is the message that comes up when you click that link. And it's, again, very clunky and it could be confusing, but because we're only talking about gathering opt-in information from cell phones, this is what it says. Current federal regulations require Comcast to secure written permission to text or call mobile phones when using automated dialing equipment. The number associated with your account has been identified as a landline number, and this permission is not required. Could be confusing, but it's there now just to show you, and I'm indicating to all of you listening to me right now, that what we're talking about here is just focusing on the cell phones right now. However, and this is what's happening now. They are opting in. Like I said, 53% actually higher opt-in for SMS texting than getting phone calls on their cell phones. We have started sending promotional texts, and Rob mentioned the football team that sent too many texts. We are trying to keep the promise that if you're going to opt in to these specific offers and getting text messages from us, we are really trying to say we won't do it any more than 3 to 5 times a month. And certainly the lesson from the football team shows us that we better stick with that. But more importantly, there is a full preference center in development. And I believe very strongly in the idea that we have to ask people's permission. We want to speak to them the way they want to be spoken to. people are interested in special offers and news and programming information and speed increases and all of the kinds of things they want to learn about Comcast, we want to do it from the customer's point of view. And rather than, okay, now let's get permission to call you, and now we'll get permission to mail you, and now we'll get permission to email you, we'd rather do it from the customer's point of view that says, what do you want to hear about and how do you want to hear about it? And that's what we're working with Possible Now on to develop that preference center. We want to make sure that it stays within my account so that it just becomes how a customer manages their account. And most importantly, every time someone's a new customer, we want to make sure it's part of their onboarding. So when we tell them how their bill will look and we tell them what's new about their services and the apps that they can use to be part of Comcast and Xfinity, we also want to make sure that we ask them how we can communicate with them, and that's going to be an important part of this as well. So this is the beginnings of what this is going to look like. And, we will develop this through time, and we'll work with our marketing and sales teams to be able to access this information. And I think that as time goes on, it will become even more and more valuable to a customer, let alone to Comcast, in the way that we want to communicate and work the customer experience. So, and I really have to thank Possible Now for partnering with us on this, because obviously their participation both on the compliance and the way this looks and the way it works is very important. So basically, Comcast will continue to comply with the law, will continue to call people on their cell phones the right way, and we will move to meet customer expectations by speaking with them the way that they prefer to be spoken with. So I appreciate the time to share this with you, and I will turn this now back to Rob.
Very good, Jane. Thank you for those valuable insights. From a content perspective, that concludes today's call, but I do want to call out that there are a number of resources that are going to be made available to everyone in attendance. First of all, today's webinar will be made available through our resource centers at both Possible Now and Compliance Point, but we can also make available the checklist and white paper as promised. I'll share my contact detail with you so I can share it directly. Another offer we'd like to make is a free wireless test scrub. Some of you may still be going off the self-designation approach to customers identifying whether or not their phone numbers are wireless. We have a very fast process that we can turn around for you to share statistics on what percentage of your database fall into those different wireless categories. We can do that for free. For those of you thinking about cross-channel compliance, we're also going to be hosting a webinar on the new CASL legislation, Canada's anti-spam regulations that are out there that go into effect on July 1st. So you can email us at webinars@possiblenow.com, or again, check our resource and preference center for more information. Would really encourage you to go there. If you go to Possible Now and manage MyPreferences, you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, specifically what types of content you would like to receive beyond white papers and articles. There are some great videos and events that are out there as well. So again, my contact info is available and on the screen. So anyone that has questions and follow-up, or if there are resources that you need, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure you get in touch with the right people who can address any questions you may have.
Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes today's web conference. You may now disconnect.